Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Coming up on this segment, we should have a very interesting segment with the boys. But before we begin, I do want to remind you yet again to leave a tip or donation if you do. Here talking about hockey a little bit. I know these two guys are not the biggest hockey guys, but it should be exciting. Obviously, we have a lot of young talent that I kind of want to talk about. Maybe since you're not necessarily hockey guys, I kind of want to get kind of like an analogy as to how you guys view these kind of breakout stars in your respective sports. So, just going to start off with a guy I've talked about a lot on the show. If you guys have seen any of my segments, I truly love this guy from the Edmonton Oilers, the young rookie defenseman. Evan Bouchard, incredible fantasy season, one of the leading point scorers for the Oilers in the postseason. So, just starting off with you, I guess, Eric, since you're more into like this fantasy mindset, what can you say about a guy who is young and hungry and just wants to do well, not only in real life but in fantasy? And I just want your thoughts on that, because I know you're dabbling in fantasy a little bit here.
Fantasy, you can always count on a young guy. Like when you're, of course, I play fantasy football, so it's a little different. So you get that young quarterback or the young running back, and you know he's just going to produce. He's going to stay healthy. He's going to go out there and he has all the energy and enthusiasm, charisma to get his points, and fantasy points, of course. Which is important for us because we play fantasy, hockey, football, baseball, or whatever you want to do. But hockey's fast. I
Absolutely.
A couple hockey games, and these guys glide on the ice. Like you can be the best athlete in the world if you can't skate. Oh man, like ice skating, I tried it once, and it was not pretty. Because we gotta respect these guys.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think you're in good hands when you have a young player like that.
Yeah, how about you, Nelson? I know that basketball is another one of those fast-paced games where you blink and you miss the action. So how do you feel like hockey translates to like this fast-paced nature of sports?
Well, it is completely different from fantasy basketball, so it's and like you say, I follow hockey, but I don't follow it like that in terms of fantasy. So I can't really say if you can like compare the two, despite the fact that they have fast pacing and like not to mention like the schedule with some of these basketball games, they kind of interfere with a lot of, and it's really sometimes the matches they're down to like what team is scheduled to play and which players are scheduled to play, because if you have 0 players scheduled to play on one day, you immediately lose that day in fantasy. So it's like it kind of stinks. Like it's not really like how in football where everyone is going to play at least some point during the week, and it's most likely going to happen like exactly when you need them to happen. But it's like for basketball, there's some players, like some key players that you aren't going to be able to play. Like let's say you need a win on the very last day before the week concludes, and you have Jokic on your team. But guess what? Jokic is not playing on that last day. You lose, and it's really like it's completely different because you also have to keep in mind like who's injured, who's going to be playing, especially with everyone sitting down. I didn't even mention people sitting down, but the ones that purposely choose to rest some of these games. So it's a little bit more complicated, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of like fantasy hockey, you have a lot of different positions to cover, and you just have a lot of different points to kind of think about. Obviously, Evan Bouchard is a young defenseman who is a scoring threat as well. But in terms of fantasy hockey, you also need to worry about, say, you want your centers, your forwards to kind of score you the goals, get you the assists, and then also your defensemen, since fantasy hockey is so versatile in terms of scoring, to kind of get you the hits, the penalty minutes. So it's kind of like a weird thing, and that's why I highlight a guy like Evan Bouchard, because he is kind of in the back line. He's a defenseman. His job is to stop offensive attacks. So it's kind of interesting to see how these different fantasy sports, obviously in fantasy basketball, where points are more at a premium, kind of see how different positions play into it. So I'm going to start off with you, Nelson. What do you think is one of the more valuable positions in terms of fantasy sports, whether it be basketball, hockey, what have you?
Well, I I think probably like the center position is going to
Absolutely.
be your most. It really all depends. Whichever player can accumulate the most stats at every in every category, that's going to be the best player. So it's like it could be anyone. It could be Jokic. It could be Giannis. Those usually are the top two picks in any sort of fantasy draft because they can get a lot of points and they can also get a lot of rebounds on a consistent basis. So players like that can get the scoring done as well as like the rebounding and every other stat. Usually it's rebounding because that's a relatively easy stat to get if you're, especially if you're a center or if you're one of those players that actually hunts for rebounds. It's why Luka Doncic was such a steal and has always been a steal in every single draft. Same with Russ when in 2017 when he was averaging the triple double. That was the king of fantasy at the time in 2017. And so it's like now the king is like Jokic. So it's more so the player than the position, and you usually try to find the players that can accumulate the most stats.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Eric? How do you feel about this kind of position-driven mindset in terms of playing fantasy?
In terms of playing fantasy, if I'm not mistaken, I think hockey players they get subbed out, right? Like super quick. And
Yeah.
sometimes they're on the ice for like maybe 2 minutes tops, and then they go out, and then you don't know when they're gonna come back. So you're kind of sitting there watching the game. You're like, come on, sub back in, you bum. Get back in there, get back in. It's like you. But like in football, definitely the quarterback would be a huge, point stealer and a running back and a targeted wide receiver. But it's hard to predict because a lot of these times when you're doing the drafts or when you're setting your lineup or when you're picking your dudes, you're anticipating some sort of like production from them, and it's just like sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have a tough game. Sometimes they get the yips, as I like to call them. I think that they forget how to do their job, kind of like what Kyrie did on last night's game. But just joking. Yeah, honestly, it's very important when you pick your, the people that are going to be representing your fantasy league, and especially in hockey. Such a fast-paced environment. I don't know exactly how the scoring goes in hockey, but I can imagine like what Nelson's saying, that like how the center, the forwards, they get up to the ice and they try to score. So I can imagine something like that.
Before I let you guys go, I just want to know, who do you think is going to be one of the breakout fantasy players in any sport next year? We have a lot of exciting young players in every sport, so it's gonna be an interesting question. I know it's a tough question, and I'll start off with you, Nelson. Who do you think is going to be a breakout fantasy player in basketball terms?
Victor.
Victor, yes.
Easily.
I know Eric's the Spurs fan here, so that will make him very happy. So,
Preach.
all right, Eric. I know that Victor's a hard one to top, but do you think you can top him there?
Oh man, I'd rather I'd rather walk off a cliff right now than see. In
Uh,
terms of the NBA, a breakout fantasy star, I would say probably I'm gonna go with Jason Tatum. I think he's gonna
okay.
find his way.
Okay.
I think they're gonna he's gonna step it up during the playoffs because a lot of people said that he's not the guy that he lets
Yeah.
his team down. He only scores like 20 buckets and whatever. But no, I think he's actually gonna step it up. I think I still have the Mavs in 6,
Okay.
so I can come back on the podcast and you guys can laugh at me when the Boston Celtics win. So,
Yeah, man. Well,
yeah, honestly, probably Jason Tatum.
okay, that's a nice pick. Obviously, as a Celtics fan, I appreciate that. But that should just about wrap up this segment, and unfortunately, that will end these fellas' time on this show. But before you go, do you guys have any goodbyes to say? Want to rep your podcast? I'll give you a couple of minutes to give you a little spiel, if you will. Starting with you, Eric.
Alrighty, guys, are you ready to go into the world of professional wrestling, sports entertainment?
Oh
I
yeah.
take you on a journey every night at 8 p.m. Pacific Time, 11 p.m. Eastern Time for the GSMC Wrestling Lawyer Podcast. We talk about everything professional wrestling, all your favorite stars, and sometimes we do have that entertainment pop culture kind of crossover. So you always know the podcast is going to be very entertaining. I can make you a wrestling fan. Just give me 2 minutes of your time, 1,010%. So don't be too shy.
All right, man. That's my man Easy E right there. Nelson, I know you're a simple man. Any last words from you, my friend?
Just go check out the basketball podcast. The finals are starting, and I stream at 12:30 every single day Eastern time. So just tune in.
All right, guys. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you. We will see you maybe in a couple of weeks. Who knows? Maybe there will be some different guests. So thank you guys for being on my pod. Really appreciate it, guys.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chris.
No worries. Thank you, man.
Have a good one.
You too, man. So, let me get reoriented here. Coming up next on the GSMC Fantasy Podcast, what a fun experience that was. You're going to have to listen to me for the next couple of minutes, but we should have some very good segments ahead. Coming up next, we will have the rookie mock draft. I will be analyzing a rookie mock draft I did this next couple of episodes, and stick around to the end of the show. I'll be giving you more Euros action, how to play fantasy soccer, and also analyzing my Euros fantasy team. You don't want to miss it. We will be right back on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without